Welcome, everyone, to the August 2023 meeting of the Memphis Astronomical Society. Once again, I'm your faithful host, Jeremy Veldman. We have an excellent program for you guys tonight. We're getting into solar eclipse mode. Our speaker tonight has been to almost every continent on Earth and seeing several solar eclipses. He's got some amazing stories and valuable information to share with you so that you can begin planning for the fall eclipse and the total solar eclipse coming next April. So stay tuned for this meeting. It's going to be highly informative. Before we get started, let me just share a few preliminary pieces of information. First of all, once again, we're the Memphis Astronomical Society. We are a nonprofit public service organization promoting interest in education in astronomy and related sciences. The best way to get to know us is on our website, memphisastro.org. We've got a Facebook group. And of course, if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to this YouTube channel. And you can see some of our past meetings as well as outreach events on this channel. Love to have you as a part of our community. If you're interested in joining our email list to receive updates, just click the join button on our website and it brings up a separate form. You just fill out your details that way. And we just send you information, whether it's outreach events, meetings like this, observing events, just anything to kind of keep you informed on what we're up to. So the best way is to get on our email list and we'll stay in contact with you. If you are interested in outreach opportunities from the Memphis Astronomical Society, we got a form for that on our website as well. By the way, I'm saying all this and I didn't put a slide in there, but we are releasing a new website soon. So everything I'm showing you by the time you watch this video will likely be obsolete, just FYI. But we got a great new website coming out with some snazzy new features. So hopefully it's easier to navigate and more informative. So anyway, I just want to mention that. So anyway, but we do have an outreach form on our website that you can click and fill out your details. And of course, we do outreach events around town for libraries, schools, communities. So yeah, if you would like to have us come out either with our telescopes or to do observing event or to do a presentation, then there's a form for that on our website as well. Calendar of events. We got this meeting tonight. Next Saturday, August the 12th, we are planning to be at our dark sky site at Burton Sugar Farm. And incidentally, that's the night also of the Perseid meteor shower. So hoping for clear skies. We've had a rough stretch this year when it comes to astronomy, especially our events at Burton's. I'm not even sure we've been out there yet this year, but hopefully our luck will change. And we're planning to be out there the following Saturday as well. So really the next two Saturdays, the 12th and the 19th, will be at Burton Sugar Farm if it's clear. So again, you're on our email list, just stay tuned. We'll send the go, no-go notice depending on the weather that morning. And the 26th, we're planning to be back at Mosh, terrible name. You know it as the Pink Palace, the Museum of Science and History. They'll have their annual astronomy night. So we'll get our telescopes out there and do an event there. So again, Pink Palace, now known as the Museum of Science and History, Mosh, will be there on the 26th. Now, another event coming up is September 14 to 16. And I mentioned this briefly at the last meeting. So this is the second annual Arkansas Dark Sky Festival. Looks like a pretty interesting event. So, and this will be September 14, 15, and 16. There's a link, a bit.ly link that you can click on to sign up, or you can just do a Google search for Arkansas Dark Sky Festival. They need volunteers. So whether you're a telescope operator or you'd like to help out in any other capacity, hosting a table, parking, just anything. I couldn't make it last year because I was sick. I am planning to go this year and should be a really interesting event. So if you're interested in checking this out, mark your calendar for September 14 to 16. And again, it's not just a star party / observing event. It's really intended to be an event that promotes dark skies and the importance of IDA, International Dark Sky Association, and preserving dark skies. Almost like preserving a national park. Growing problem, spread awareness of the growing problem of light pollution. So this is a big deal and also a great opportunity if you're looking to get out and see some dark skies. So that will be September 14, 15, and 16. Bear Creek south of the Buffalo National River, off of US Highway 65. It's about a 4-hour drive from Memphis. So anyway, I think registration is open for this event. Okay, we were at Hinton Park last month again, second time. So we had a rough year with astronomy, but we're 2 for 2 when it comes to our outreach and mentoring events at Hinton Park. So this is a great turnout, and we are planning to do this again, not this month, but next month. That'll be September 23rd. I got a air conditioner on in my background, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay. So again, we won't be at Hinton Park in August, but we do plan to be there again September the 23rd. So again, if you have a telescope and you need some help getting it set up and learning how to use it, some mentoring, whether it's telescope, astrophotography, whatever, this is a great opportunity for you in Collierville. And we get our veteran telescope operators out to kind of give one-on-one assistance to people. So we've had 2 successful sessions. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to jinx it, but we're planning to be out there again on the 23rd. So mark your calendars. Those of you who are wondering when we're going to be doing this again, that'll be September the 23rd, not this month, but next month. Okay, no new members to announce this month, but if you are a member, check out the Meteorite. Again, that's our newsletter. And Slack will send, we keep meaning to do this, but of course we never do. We'll send an email out with a link to Slack so that you can join our general MAS Slack channel. And it's another way to stay involved with us. And oh yeah, Cafe Press. I don't have my MAS swag on tonight because I'm traveling, but some of you have really taken advantage of this resource as well. So if you're looking for t-shirts, coffee mugs, ball caps, logos, golf balls, just anything that has the MAS logo or the MASFITs, MASFIT, of course, is our astrophotography group, then this is your website, Cafe Press, Memphis Astronomical Society, and you can order whatever you like. And I always like coming to our in-person meetings because I see new stuff and it's got our logo on it. So check that out. Come on out and don your swag at the next in-person meeting at Rhodes College. I expect to see updates every month. Anyway, just saying. Okay. Merrill is not here tonight. He is traveling to an event in Colorado, and that is I think it's a beer tasting event with his son. And incidentally, it's at these events that UFOs are discovered. So just saying, you never know what happens when you go to an event like this. But anyway, he hosts our astrophotography group meeting, and our next meeting is coming up August the 16th. That's the MASFITs, of course. So mark your calendars, and our previous meetings, of course, are on the YouTube channel. So you can see last month's meeting, July the 20th. And you can jump in anytime. You have to be a member. You got to be an MAS member to participate in this group if you want to be on the Zoom call live. But if you're looking to get involved in and learn more about astrophotography, then this is the group for you. These guys are doing some pretty neat stuff. And again, the past meetings are on our YouTube channel. Check that out. If you get involved, you can jump on anytime. And it's a great way to learn and really hone your skills as an astrophotographer. So guys are doing some pretty interesting things. So again, August the 16th. And speaking of eclipses, we have eclipse classes available at any of our in-person either meetings or outreach events. So we're getting close now. We got this first one coming up in a couple months. That's the Annular. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then, of course, the big one is the total, and that's next April. You're going to need eye protection, ISO certified solar eclipse glasses. We got them. We got the best looking ones out there. They got the MAS logo on them. So, and we're giving them away for free. So now, again, you've got to be present at either our in-person meetings or some of our outreach events. I'm presenting, when am I presenting? Sometime in August. I forget where, I forget when, and I forget to who. So that's not good. But sometime in the next couple of weeks, I'll be giving a talk on the solar eclipse. Danny Wilson knows, and he's on the call. He can remind me later. But it's sometime in August. I'll be there with the eclipse glasses. So if you're there, or if you'd like to be there, I'll have eclipse glasses for you. And at our next in-person meeting, we'll have eclipse glasses also. We're Zoom tonight, but anyway, just letting you know they're there, and we'll get them to you. We'll bring them to Hinton Park also. So if you need glasses, we got them. You just need to come to one of our in-person events. Okay, kind of kick that horse. So anyway, just letting you know. And I think that's all the business I have for tonight. So let's jump right in. I'm going to announce, I'm very happy to introduce our speaker tonight. I met her briefly at the Texas Star Party, but truth be told, I kind of spied on her a little bit on YouTube. I saw a couple of her presentations for another astronomical group. And I said, if I meet this lady, I've got to get her to speak to our group tonight because she has some invaluable information to share. And she's Debbie Moran, and she has had a lifelong interest in astronomy. She grew up in West Texas in Midland, where the only scenery was in the sky until moving to Houston at the age of 12. She has been a member of the Houston Astronomical Society since 1980, recently retired from 9 years as chair of the Novice Programs, and she continues being active in the community outreach. Since seeing her first solar eclipse in Indonesia in 1983, she has seen a combined 15 total and 5 annular eclipses, soon to be 16 and 6. And she's traveled all around the world, and she's only been clouded out twice. So she's had a pretty good track record. She's also retired from the Houston Symphony violin section after 27 years in 2010. And she has quite a story to tell and some amazing information to share with you guys to prepare for the solar eclipses coming up. So without further ado, help me give a warm welcome to our speaker tonight, Miss Debbie Moran.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I really appreciate your having me. It's always fun for me to talk about these eclipses. And I'm going to talk about 3 things. One is just how eclipses work, in case there's anybody who needs that information. Then there's the experience of eclipse travel. And I will have a little travel log in there, but these are chosen intentionally. I learned something from the specific trips I'm going to show you. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to prepare in the Memphis area. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Not sure why it jumped way out there since I was at the beginning. Sorry about that. Let me try again. There we go. Okay, so I call this total eclipse the thrill of the chase, as we call those who try to chase the eclipses all over the world eclipse chasers. And so the question is, why do we do this? Well, this particular photograph is very similar to the one I saw in my 5th grade textbook in Midland of what an eclipse might look like. And I decided at that time that I must see one. I heard the stars come out, but I did find out later on that there's no photo that really is exactly like what you see with your naked eye. And I also found out that eclipses are a little bit like a kaleidoscope, that no 2 are alike, no 2 experiences are alike, and no 2 cultural experiences are alike. So there are a certain number of people who, after they see their first eclipse, decide that can't just be their only one, and they chase them all over the world. So I'll talk a little bit about why that happens, and then we'll hopefully get you interested, if you've never seen one, to see your first one, since you have an opportunity here in the United States on April 8th, 2024. So every 18 months to 2 years, a miracle happens somewhere on Earth when the paths of the moon and the sun cross in the sky. And I will show you why that we actually see that as a miracle. I see it probably as the best miracle in nature other than childbirth. So this photograph is by one of the people I chase eclipses with, Byron Braswell, who travels with Ring of Fire eclipses. And this was from Australia, north of Cairns. So these are some of the eclipse chasers. This actually is not on an eclipse trip. I'll show you this a little bit later. This is for a transit of Venus trip, and this was in Kyrgyzstan. But where are the women? There's definitely women there who are all behind the camera. So why is that? Why do we chase eclipses? Well, this is almost like a miracle because we have exactly 1 moon and 1 sun, and the moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, but is also almost exactly 400 times closer than the sun. So that gives us this miraculous coincidence very close to similar angular diameter in the sky. They look virtually the same size. So why do we not have an eclipse every single month? Well, the moon's orbit is inclined about 5 degrees to the Earth's orbit around the sun. So most new moons and full moons, we don't have lunar eclipses or solar eclipses because the moon shadow misses the Earth, or the Earth shadow misses the moon. It's just too high or too low. So in order to have an eclipse, you have to have the moon lined up with the sun exactly as it's going through a node or passing from the high point of the orbit to the low point of the orbit. So here's a schematic of when you can have eclipses and when you can't have them. So again, it shows that on the far sides here, you can have it favorable for an eclipse, but on the sides, you can't have an eclipse. The shadows miss each other. So as it turns out, the apparent size of the sun varies a little bit. So the Earth's orbit around the sun is elliptical. And for that reason, the sun is sometimes a little bit bigger as we view it, or just a little bit smaller. And the same thing happens to a greater extent with the moon. The moon's orbit is even more elliptical. So it can either look larger to us or smaller. And by the way, larger, when people talk about supermoons, they're talking about a full moon that coincides when the moon is especially close to us. So it's a large looking full moon in the sky. Because of these variations in apparent size, there's more than one kind of eclipse you can have. So if the moon's apparent size is large enough to fully cover the sun's photosphere, we get a total eclipse. But if it's a little bit too small, like the eclipse we're going to have on October 14th, it doesn't fully cover the photosphere. We don't see the corona, so that's like on the bottom right. And it's a very pretty view. You see the photosphere around the moon, but I need to tell you that's just a special kind of partial eclipse. There is no comparison between a partial eclipse and a total solar eclipse. And it's very important that you be within the path. It's not a linear, gradual buildup of excitement from 70% to 90% to 99% to 100%. It's a quantum leap going from 99.9% coverage to 100%. Not the same thing at all. So this shows you that an annular eclipse can be very pretty, especially when they're down on the horizon. And when they're on the horizon, you can take a picture like this without needing a solar filter, just as like you can watch a sunset without necessarily needing a filter because there's so much filtration in the Earth's atmosphere. So HAS member Joe Dellinger took this photo in Texas, West Texas, May 20th, 2012, without a filter. And so as you can see, that can be a pretty experience. I judge going to annular eclipses if it's something a place I want to travel or it's reasonably close by. I've seen one in my brother's front yard in Oklahoma. This next one, the El Dorado Star Party, is coinciding with in Sonora, Texas. The Ballooner Festival in Albuquerque is coinciding with the eclipse. So you can combine an annular eclipse with a really nice trip. So this just shows the moon shadow on the Earth when you have a total eclipse. So this large gray area is every place that you have a partial eclipse. At the very edges, you have barely a partial eclipse. There's a little bit of coverage. Only where you have this very dark, thin line do you have a total eclipse, because that shadow is very small. And again, the width of that line can shift quite a bit. We're fortunate to have a relatively wide path this time coming up. So the longest it will be in the United States is about 4.5 minutes. By the way, that's almost exactly the length that I saw in Indonesia. That is enough time to really enjoy it, do a number of things, and not feel extremely rushed. But you have to be close to the center line to get that length. However, you can get a very satisfying length of time with this eclipse, not that far in, and I'll show you why that is later on. So by the way, for this past eclipse, which is a very short one, which I went to Western Australia for, this is the first time I've seen the shadow of the moon on the Earth from the International Space Station, but this one was taken by a Japanese satellite, which was exploring the moon from the orbit of the moon. You can see the little black smudge down here, with probably just a little point is where it's really the most total there. So hybrid eclipses are kind of an in-between an annular and a total. What that means is the moon's apparent size is so close to the sun's that it actually makes a difference where you are in the curvature of the Earth, whether the moon completely covers the sun. So if you're in the closest portion of the Earth looking at the moon, and as it covers the sun, you get a total eclipse. But if you're on the edges of the path and the moon's curving away from the moon, the Earth's surface is curving away, it doesn't quite cover and you get an annular eclipse. So these eclipses are called hybrid because they're both total and annular. And as it turns out, there's sort of a maximum length of time of totality you can have with a hybrid eclipse. The maximum is 1 minute and 49 seconds. Now you might say, why would you go to a short eclipse? This is only 30 seconds. It was a 2005 hybrid eclipse. I was in Panama for the Annular, but this was taken way out in the ocean by Javier UBA's out on a ship. It's only 30 seconds of totality. But in this case, the inner corona is spectacular. You can see prominences all the way around. And I should mention that this exposure only shows the inner corona. The eye is still seeing the outer corona. It's just that the camera can't expose for both at the same time. You either blow out the inner corona to see the outer corona, or you lose the outer corona to see the inner corona well. So people will take different kinds of pictures depending on what they want to emphasize. But I did find from this picture when it came out that it was worth going to a short eclipse, which I ended up doing later on, twice now, as it turns out. So we actually have all three kinds of eclipses within a year. We just had off of the coast of Australia and Indonesia, a tiny bit of land in Australia, the April 20th, 2023 hybrid eclipse. Most people were out on cruise ships in the ocean to get the longest totality, but it was only about 1 minute and 10 seconds on the water. And where we were on our island, it was about 56 seconds. On October 14th, 2023, we have the annular eclipse coming up in the United States. And that does go through some really great vacation spots. So it starts way over starts way over in Texas and Corpus Christi, and it goes all the way through Midland, Sonora, Texas, into Albuquerque, Roswell, if you want to see aliens in an eclipse, and cuts a path into Utah. So there's a lot of wonderful places you can visit and see this eclipse if you want to go see an annular eclipse. This one, the moon's relatively small, so it actually takes about 5 minutes for the moon to cross the sun. You have what we call 5 minutes of annularity. And then the biggie is April 8th, 2024. Be there. You're only an hour outside the path, and I will give you some tips on how to prepare for it if you haven't already. So you need to know some eclipse terms. When you have the moon first touch the limb of the sun, we call that first contact. Then you have about 45 minutes to an hour partial phases. And then as the moon crosses over and touches the far side of the sun, you get something called a diamond ring. The last bit of sun disappears from the mountain, between the mountains on the side of the moon. And that's the beginning of totality. Only a few minutes later, the far side of the moon leaves the other edge of the sun. Another diamond ring of a little bit of spot of sunlight comes out. That's the end of totality. That's called third contact. Then there's more partial phases, and fourth contact is the true end of the eclipse. The moon has completely left the face of the sun. So just to show you really quickly what that looks like in diagrams and in photographs, over here is this first little notch of sun. Sometimes you can't see at the very, very beginning. You need to wait maybe 20 or 30 seconds before it's perceptible with naked eye, unless you're using a telescope. But it's really exciting to see that first notch of sun taken out and to have it appear to be centered going across the sun. If this were partial eclipse, it would look kind of askew, like the shadow is not going to cross exactly centered. The partial phases are fun to watch with a small telescope if you have sunspots. And right now the sun's quite active. Some people are mentioning they're already seeing sunspots naked eye just with eclipse glasses. You need eclipse glasses, but they were seeing them so large at the Astronomical League convention in Baton Rouge that you didn't even need binoculars or a telescope. What happens when you're looking with some magnification, I recommend something like a zoom lens or a small telescope. It's fun to watch the moon's shadow, or sorry, it's not the moon's shadow, the moon's edge start to cross over a sunspot, because at those times you perceive motion. You actually see, you need that, it's like watching the minute hand of a clock, but you need that relative position to perceive that motion. So I will often take a look in a telescope or a zoom lens at those times through a filter and watch the moon's edge cross over sunspots. Second contact is when totality begins. This is not quite as big a diamond ring, but that last bit of sun peeking out is called the diamond ring. At this point, it is safe to begin looking at the sun because it only lasts about 2 or 3 seconds at most, and that's not enough to burn out your eyes. So I will tell you how I catch the diamond ring. We now have wonderful apps and devices for finding out exactly what time that happens at your site. But if you don't have that, there are ways to reasonably safely do it. I mean, one, to be very safe, you can simply wait for it to completely disappear in your glasses and then look up. And if you miss the going in diamond ring, you have another chance when it comes out. But I have a little technique for making sure I catch it and then being able to let other people know when to look up. This is the following diamond ring. This is a more classic diamond ring. And then hardly everyone sticks around. Everybody's all excited by the totality. They usually don't stick around for the exit of the moon unless they're trying to take a photo like this, which shows the entire process. This can be a multiple exposure on a single frame. And it's also very beautiful if you have the weather for it and are very disciplined, take those pictures exactly the same distance and time apart. So observing eclipses safely. Well, you can never look at the sun until that photosphere is completely covered. So even when there's just a little bit of sun peeking out, you need some kind of filtration. What I have there at the end of my camera is actually my solar filter for my 5-inch telescope. I have a classic orange C5. That's what I started with. And I kind of like it because it actually shadows and shields the rest of the camera and the zoom lens from the heat of the sun instead of having one that fits exactly over it. But that served me well. We made some concentric cardboard rings and made it tight enough and then used a little tape to make sure it's not going to come off and then use that for pictures. It's also just a great way to view the partial phases. If you are not following the sun, I mean, the sun's going to move while this is happening. There are some mounts which will follow the movement of the sun, and that really gives you a much lower stress experience. You're not trying to chase it with one axis, usually just one axis, a little bit of another axis because it's the sun. But you can follow it if you're just doing partial phases with just a regular tripod. And I've done that for many years. If you're using a filter in front of binoculars, telescope, anything else, that filter needs to be at the front of your optics. It needs to be the first surface that the sun's rays hit. You don't want it way back where your eyepiece is or whatever you're using to look. So one thing I should mention is if you use something like a camera lens, now with digital cameras, you can often just swing out the viewfinder, and that way you can kind of aim it and not be looking directly at the sun once you found it. With my old school camera, I was using a right angle finder, and I'll show you in a minute that we use the shadow of the camera or of your filter to find the sun. So if you're trying to find the sun, you do not look through a finder trying to find it. So you never look directly toward the sun. What you do is try to make anything that's round appear as round as possible as a shadow. Then you have your filter. You use a right angle finder, or you swing your viewer outward. So you're never looking directly at the sun. Then you do a little bit of trial and error until it's centered in there. Having said all of this, I still do not recommend that you take a lot of complicated pictures for your first eclipse. I recommend only experience it for your first one. I have an alternative which worked very well for me for my first eclipse, which still gets you a good view of the corona. There's something called the hat trick if you are doing some kind of photographs. And what that means is if you have a filter kind of stuck to your binoculars or stuck to your camera lens or your telescope, there's going to be a point where you're taking it off as the sun is shrinking down, where it's going to make that camera or your telescope vibrate. So what you do is you do that a little bit early, and you have something like a piece of cardboard. You do not really have an Astros hat because it's got holes in it, but you have something opaque, and you hold that in front of your lens. And then when it's time to look without the filter, if you're using an aid like binoculars, With binoculars, you just look at that time. But if you're using something like a zoom lens, as soon as it's time to look and you have only corona out, you just whip that away. And if you're taking pictures, there's no more vibration. This is some stylish eclipse glasses. Actually, this might be a little bit better here. This is Emma and Trude, who I met in Australia. We actually met on a bus in Lone Pine Koala Preserve, and I had always traveled with the group. I was with the group this time. But I learned from them that you can also do some independent travel in certain countries where it's safe, and you can dramatically cut the cost compared to a tour. I recommend, if you do this more than once, that you do a judgment call whether you want to travel independently or with a group. But that makes it a little bit more easier and financially viable to do more than one eclipse. So many of them are on the opposite side of the world. If you do some of them independently with an Airbnb and all you have to do is do your airfare over there, you can do it for $1,000 less than an organized tour. So every country seems to have its own style of glasses. You guys have your Memphis Astronomical Society glasses. You just need to make sure, as Jeremy mentioned, they are ISO and CE certified. There was a problem on Amazon for the 2017 eclipse that there was no differentiation between counterfeit sellers and the responsible ones. So now if you look for eclipse glasses on Amazon, that you immediately get to a tutorial on how you know they're good, and it directs you to the reputable makers. So I like Rainbow Symphony. They're inexpensive. You can buy them in bulk for a whole group, but there's several reputable makers. And right now, I notice the Rainbow Symphony ones this year are kind of silvery looking. And we used to have silvery looking Mylar glasses, which would make the sun look blue. But these actually are like the old ones where they didn't look silvery. You get a beautiful, yet more warmer yellow sun. And I find that more aesthetically pleasing. So if you don't have a glasses, well, I actually caught a Curious George accidentally. I don't normally freeze on Curious George when I'm flipping through my PBS channels, but I noticed in very little time that they were talking about eclipses. And if you have any children, there is an episode, it's season 12, episode 7, called George's Dark Day. And the only way I've been able to find to see it online is to have Peacock and stream it on Peacock. But it's accurate. It's a 30-minute program. George forgets his glasses, so then you learn about pinhole projection with the box, and you learn about colanders. And so they cover everything, the glasses, the colander, and then they have all the safety, doesn't look at the sun until it's completely covered up. It's really a fantastic episode. So this is in Chile. I actually have a violin student who was in Houston, who's from Chile, and they moved back to Santiago, and they came to meet us in La Serena. That's his wife, and the son was 6 years old. And I was amused because while we were watching, my experienced friends were out there with a camera taking pictures. It was only a couple of minutes. And he ran over to them, very concerned that they weren't seeing it. Look, look, look. He made sure that they were looking up to see the eclipse. So, and there they are. So you can use, this is one of the tools you can use to see crescent suns without using either eclipse glasses or looking up. You can also use either your lacy fingers crossed, or you can use, this is a palm tree leaves making a lot of crescent sun. So anything that makes a narrow slit as the sun gets covered up by the moon, those crescents can be projected on the ground. A great thing to do with kids, and a very safe thing to do because they're not looking toward the sun during those phases. By the way, notice that the building is white and there's a beach. Lately, I've been choosing places with a lot of whiteness if I can get it. And that's because of the shadow bands, which I will show you in a bit. It's a phenomenon that requires a light colored surface to see. So here's a little bit about travel. This is my tour operator, Paul Maley. His wife married him. I was a member of Houston Symphony. I signed up for a trip. Then we had a European tour instead. I sold her my place, and then she met the very last day. They were split to 2 groups. She met Paul, and then they got married a few months later. So she's still traveling with him to eclipses. And I've been very happy and very loyal to them when I travel with a group. I haven't had a bad time yet. I find that Paul really prepares people. He's serious, and he makes a major effort to get people to a clear sky. But the reason I've been pretty successful is when he split us into two groups, I'm really good, if I have a choice, about choosing the better group. And that came a little bit from having learned how to fly and learning a little bit about how clouds develop. And I used some of that knowledge to choose which group or which site to go to. And I actually started to get a reputation, go wherever Debbie is, because that's going to be the clearer site if they don't both see it well. So choosing a place to see an eclipse, there's a number of factors. Number one is you want the least cloud interference. So in 1999, a lot of people went to Western Europe, were clouded out. It was going over some of the great capitals of Western Europe. And some people saw it, but it was a rainy, cloudy day. But we were in Eastern Turkey because that was practically in Iraq, because it was known to be almost completely clear, which it was desert. And so I like to joke that by the time 2024 rolls around, we'll have enough global warming that the United States will be a desert, and we'll have nice clear skies. So you want to check weather statistics. So there's a difference between statistics and actual weather that day. In 1991, because of my schedule, I went to Western Mexico, to the west coast of Mexico. My boyfriend, Matt Delavorius, went to Baja, California, which was the place that had the reputation for the clearest skies. My family went to Hawaii, which was probably the place that had the reputation for the most fun vacation. And half of that group was clouded out, unfortunately. And my roommate at the time, I was sharing an apartment just to cut some expenses, was at a 6-week Spanish course in Cuernavaca, Mexico, which is in the mountains, and had about 90% chance of clouding up because they routinely have afternoon buildup of clouds. So what happened? Well, Maps went out there on a perfectly clear sky, and at the last minute, some serious clouds came over, not enough to ruin the eclipse, but their 7 minutes of totality had a little bit of wispy clouds over it. Where I was, it was partly cloudy, and people got concerned enough that some people went to the beach. And this time I lucked out. It was only my second eclipse, and I just had everything set up. I didn't feel like I could get everything taken down. So the beach people ended up not seeing it. That's where NASA told them to go, that should be better. And we had a translucent, large oval cloud over it for the entire partial phases, good enough to actually see through and see the partials. And in 7 minutes before totality, the cloud parted. We had 7 minutes of unobstructed totality, and then the cloud came back. Where my roommate, Nancy, was in Cuernavaca, she had a totally cloudless sky with the Mayan pyramids and the eclipse sun over it. And I had sent her some material to make filters, and she said she was very popular. So you don't know, the moral is you don't know what's going to happen that day. What you do is you plan for the best place statistically, preferably with a little ability to do some mobility, to run away from clouds. We just heard a talk by Fred Espenak, and he points out that if you have the latitude, you can check the day or two before, and you may even be able to get as far as 500 miles from where you're starting out. And that in either direction, and that's a 1,000-mile path. It should be possible to find a clear area. Usually 1,000 miles of path is not covered up. I've never had to run very far, but the chances if you can run are quite good of seeing an eclipse. And so you need also accessibility. Is it easy to reach on a road? You want proximity to the center line, because the totality is always longest near the center line, and you want the longest totality possible unless you're a Bailey's bead person and you're at the edge measuring those. So what I like to do is find a site with a road that runs roughly along the eclipse path, not one that runs across. So if you do have to run, you're not booting yourself completely out of the path because the only road available is going out. So you have a nice network of roads in Arkansas. You should be able to run for some length of time if you have bad weather and stay within the path. And you want a cool place to visit. You never know if you might get clouded out, so you also want to have a good travel experience. And that's why for the 2017 eclipse, the Grand Tetons had the worst price gouging, because it had the combination of best weather and best vacation aspect to it. And now we're having the same problem, Central Texas in the Hill Country, which is probably within Texas the best vacation type of experience. And and a lot of wonderful vacation spots are very close to the center line, but not every place price gouges that badly. So I'm going to talk to you about some alternatives to going where it's the most expensive if you didn't, say, prepare 2 years before and the price gouging starts. And a cruise, some people like cruises. They don't make the best pictures, but they like that there's some flexibility to move. It's not infinite. The cruise ship can only go so fast, but they will make an effort if they're in a cloudy area to get to a hole in the clouds. So this is Javier Ubier's interactive Google Earth eclipse map. These are wonderful. He has them for eclipses way far back and way far in the future. And I'll show you that in more detail a little bit later, but this shows the path that definitely covers Mexico and Texas and Arkansas near you guys. Here's Memphis. And this thing can be blown, it can be zoomed in, it can be dragged, and you can zoom it up all the way to seeing an individual house and then click on it and see all the statistics for how you will see the eclipse, the direction, the times it's total, the time the eclipse starts, and also I've mentioned direction, so you will know the compass direction and the altitude at totality. The good thing about this eclipse coming up in 2024 is it's a relatively high altitude eclipse, and that gives you a better chance on a partly cloudy day to see it in a hole. Still, you might not think of everything. So this was in Zambia, and the farmers decided that was a great day to do their burns. Fortunately, we got really concerned. This is our site, but fortunately, this was in the opposite direction of the sun. But we did have a little bit of smoke in the direction of the sun, but not enough to be a problem. But nowadays, the clearest areas, you also have to worry about wildfire risk. So you have to balance those two out. Where you're going to have the clearest weather, but you're not going to have fires. This one was intentional, unfortunately. So getting the most out of an eclipse, plan your experience ahead and decide what you're going to focus on. So there's a man named Norm Sperling out of California, and I heard him give a talk before I ever saw my first eclipse. And he said, every eclipse is going to seem like 8 seconds. And it's true that your first eclipse seems to go by in a flash, but he has a solution to that. He thinks that the mind, he says, don't just stare at the sun the whole time. If you have one image in your mind's eye, it condenses that into a very short time in memory. So he suggests doing a number of things. So looking around, looking at the sunset colors, drawing something, taking a wide field image, looking back at the sun, look in binoculars, don't look in binoculars, doing a variety of things. And I tried that. I actually had a 4-minute eclipse in Turkey, which seemed shorter to me. And all I was doing is just staring through my zoom lens the whole 4 minutes. It seemed to go by in a flash. And the 2-minute eclipse in Australia, I took his advice and it actually seemed longer. I actually felt the whole 2 minutes tick by with some stateliness to it. So the problem is that there are 3 things that happen all at once in the last minute before totality. The good thing is that at least a couple of these things happen they happen in reverse. So if you miss one before the eclipse, you have another chance after the eclipse for that first minute afterwards. And they're all wonderful. So this is another reason to go to more than one eclipse. I haven't seen the same phenomenon. I haven't seen all 3 of them at every single eclipse. I've decided to focus on one or the other. The first is Baily's Beads. I have a video of that later. But as the moon is crossing in front of the sun, it has a bumpy edge. There's mountains on the edge. And eventually what was once a crescent of light begins to break up into what we call Baily's Beads. And that's just beads of sun between the mountains of the moon. There are people who get to do science. They go to the edge of the path and they're just barely within the totality and they get a very prolonged beading. So beads forming and unforming a lot longer there. They have a much shorter corona experience, but they have a very long Baily's Beads experience. But even at the center line, you still see that crescent break up and become beads. So what I do is, as that's starting to happen, if I have a crowd with me, I want to make sure they see it. I also have the timing for that particular location. Now there's apps that will do that. And if you know exactly where you are on Javier Ubier's map, he has very precise timings. I found they worked really well in Australia. But if you are a little worried, I sometimes take very short glances, but I pretend, no matter how comfortable it feels, because it's just a few beads, that it's as if I'm looking at the full sun. So if I don't see a diamond ring, I immediately glance away, even if it feels comfortable. So the danger in a total eclipse the reason they're considered dangerous is because normally you would look away reflexively from the full lit up sun. But as it narrows to a slit, it becomes almost comfortable to look at. And that's the risk, that your children might look up at it. I think that may be why some countries keep the children inside. You may want a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 ratio of adults and small children, but they can get mesmerized by that. You need to be very careful that they are really good about their solar safety. And I had my nephew and my niece, and I think they were like 6 and 4 in my brother's front yard in Oklahoma. And I had coached them so much. I had my telescope so they could have a really good view, but they just kept saying over and over, never look at the sun. They were really good. And then they were quite, we couldn't look at that one at all because it was an annular eclipse. So they actually behaved, but I was a little worried. It was just one of me and 2 little kids, and they still did a great job. So let's take a look at some of the things that can happen in the last minute. So I'm going to start this one. This is shadow bands, and you need a light colored surface. Sometimes people bring something light, like a sheet or a white towel, or the side of a white building works. And this only happens sometimes. But as the sun is becoming a narrow slit, you can get this phenomenon, which we call shadow bands, where it looks like bands of alternating shadow and light sort of propagating across the ground. And they're wonderful to see. So this is the best video. They're very subtle. They're hard to videotape. This one I'm going to start, it starts a little farther out, but I'm going to take you, once they show it, just going to describe shadow bands for a minute. And once it gets started, I'm going to take you to the part of the video where they become much more pronounced as it gets closer to totality. With these next 3 videos, you will definitely know when totality hits, because you can hear it. So let's try over here. So I'm getting a little closer. Now you begin to see the shadow bands, that kind of flutteriness of shadows going across the light colored paper there. And as totality comes, you might want to take a look at the camera that's taking this, the shadow. It'll be very clear. And notice how fast this darkens, how bright it is until the very last minute. Even a little bit of sun puts out quite a bit of light. So this being Asian people, they're relatively restrained. Let's take a look at the next video. I'm going to show you the first 2 minutes of this video because it's the very best I've seen of the approaching shadow. And I actually did not do that until Idaho. So for Idaho and for Oregon in 2017, you had to look away from the sun. So it depends what time of day the sun is up, and which way the approaching shadow is coming from. And it takes some discipline to turn your back to the sun. But this camera did this for this group, and it's really wonderful. It starts out, the shadow's coming at them at 1,700 miles an hour, and it starts out very subtle. It's just a subtle darkening in the background, and then it really takes off. So I've actually never seen the shadow go all the way to this point, because I've usually turned around to the sun before this happens.
So I guess your stuff is there.
It looks like the mountain's in shadow over there already.
Yeah. Well, it's like you can't see the shadow, but you can see that it's not there, if that makes sense.
Here it goes. Oh, it's getting so small. Oh, look, the mountains are in shadow. Oh, look at this. Whoa! Oh, man. Dit is zo gaaf.
This is dusk, but it's sped up. This is true time lapse.
Jezus, jongens.
Woehoe! Het was 2 seconden. Ja, kijk, kijk. Oh!
See the stars?
Wow.
Stars out.
So you could hear the diamond ring first and then the actual totality there. There's usually a lot of oh my gods. I think when Fred Espenak presented, there was somebody who was only saying oh my god. There's a eclipse chaser in Australia, the popularizer there, Kate Russo, and she always tries to make a point to see the shadow also receding. This is best to do when you're either elevated or have a large flat direction. So this is Joe Dellinger. You can see there are some clouds in Hawaii, but this is in Hawaii. But again, this is not really what it looks like. It's more pronounced with your eye than with the camera. Then there's the last thing to watch, which is for the diamond ring itself. And you'll see.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Take that one off.
Starting out.
Filters off.
And then they take off.
Glasses off.
Glasses off. Glasses
Start getting
off.
ready. Don't look quite yet. Don't look quite yet.
Oh, look.
Shadows coming. 10, 9,
8, 7, 6,
there.
Diamond ring! Diamond ring! Diamond ring!
Oh my god!
And this is a picture of a very wide field picture of the diamond ring. So if you do only one thing, it actually works with, say, an iPhone. I often do this, just take a wide field picture, especially if you get the eclipse sun in a very pretty setting. But none of these pictures look like the sun actually looks to your naked eye. That's why I recommend you go, it's like music, it's much better live. So I actually do not like to show too many pictures because I worry they may actually keep people from going to an eclipse because that's not what you see with your eye. So eclipses and cultural experiences, traveling to an eclipse is a little bit like throwing a dart at the map and having the sun and the moon tell you where to go. So I've gone to a lot of places I never thought I would get to. And these are all the places I've been. Started out in 1983. Somehow I talked my parents into financing a trip right after college to Indonesia. I'd never actually done much world travel at all, but it was wonderful. It's Taiwan, Singapore, Bangkok, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. And the eclipse itself was in Surabaya, Indonesia. And after that, I got kind of hooked, but my first 3 eclipses were 8 years apart. Work sometimes got in the way, and they've really picked up since I retired. And I also have more means to travel to chase eclipses at this stage of life. So you don't have to do it every year, all the time. Just make sure you do it some. So this is in 1981. I had never seen an eclipse. I knew that this was coming up. I'd heard Paul Maley give some various talks, and he talked about the eclipse. And I managed to, and I was just out of college. I managed to talk my parents into taking me. I think my brother was not available, but we went on this trip to Indonesia, and it's still the best corona I've seen. And I found that the experienced people also said at the time that was the best corona they've seen. So these were some of us stayed on the roof of the hotel. There was another contingent that drove about 3 hours north because they thought they would get more nature and animals. But it turned out there were just tons of tourists doing that. And when they came back, they said there wasn't so much as a mosquito, that all these cars had scared off all the animals. Meanwhile, we had roosters crowing and chanting from the mosques, and the zoo animals were braying the whole time. And we had just a wonderful experience in the middle of Surabaya, Indonesia. So these guys were hotel workers, and they were using my homemade. At that time, I don't think I recommend people do this now, but we were using several layers of space blanket, 2 to 3. It was better built then, and usually 2 or 3 layers was pretty safe. And we were just buying that at Academy and stacking it together and making filters, and my eyes survived that. But I've noticed it's gotten thinner and a lot less substantial. So it's so easy to get glasses and filtration material. It's very cheap. Just plan ahead and do that. So I've made notes since I didn't have a fancy camera. First thing I did was I kept a log of what was happening. So at 10:40, there were loudspeakers at the mosque advising townspeople against looking up at the sun, or that's what we were told. Then the rooster crowed, and the animals in the zoo got excited. We were about 3/4 of a mile from the zoo. We could hear this cacophony. It went on once it started, went all the way through totality. Chanting from the mosque, then totality. And this is beautiful. And by the way, this eclipse was predicted to be overcast the day before. It's supposed to be rainy and overcast. We woke up to overcast, but at noon, things started to clear out. And a few minutes after totality, it was overcast for the rest of the day. So don't necessarily despair. Sometimes you just luck out with the changes in the weather from the drop in the temperature. Then I noticed I didn't know about prominences at that time, but there's something that looks like red pieces of either slits or dots of laser light on the edge of the moon. You're seeing the prominences. Some people describe them as pink. At that particular eclipse, it looks very red. The same thing in Australia. And I've also seen them look pink. You don't see all the stars like I thought in 5th grade. You just see the brightest stars and the brightest planets. So I could see Venus and Sirius naked eye, and I could see Mars and Betelgeuse with binoculars. And all I did was I brought my binoculars for this one. Didn't bring a big camera. And then but I did take these thorough notes. You can also set up a camera behind everyone who's observing, looking toward the sun, and get a very satisfying video that way. Or you can, back then we were told to bring a tape recorder so you hear people reacting. What I did do that nobody else did is I picked a direction from the roof and periodically took photos in that direction to show it getting dark. Turns out the light turns about 20 minutes before, but you need to wait for about the last 7 minutes for it to get more dramatic. And even then, these are probably 7 minutes, 2 minutes, and during total or just before totality, these pictures. It really is back. It's really on the back end of getting covered that the sun really gets darker. What I did do, and this is what I would recommend if you've never been to an eclipse for a 4-minute eclipse, is I sketched it. And 4 minutes was enough to really do a pretty detailed sketch. So the black you see there on the edges were actually bright red. And I don't always see this for every eclipse, but I almost saw this corona as having hard edges like a flower petals. Then a couple months later, the Sky and Telescope composite photo came. You cannot get this with just one exposure. I think this one was with a radial filter, which differentially filters from the inner corona outward, and you still don't see the prominences on the inner corona very well. But here is my sketch compared with the Sky and Telescope photograph, and it's pretty darn good. And this longer streamer is really what I saw. The camera doesn't capture it all the way, but I saw a very long streamer over here. So sketching is actually a good way to get a pretty accurate view of what's up there. And I've done that cursory sketch for 2 minutes in Australia, but you can actually get some detail for 4 minutes. And those are the two coronas I remember most in detail are the ones I sketched. Now, the other thing I want to point out is that most photos that are not processed show the sky background as black. That's not the case. It's more like a deep dusk during totality. You want to plan for the weather, and I mentioned that that we were on the west coast of Mexico, north of Puerto Vallarta. We had a partly cloudy sky. At this particular eclipse, there's always been something different with the animals. This one, it's like mosquitoes turned on, almost like someone had flipped a switch at totality. It's like it was quiet, and then suddenly there were mosquitoes swarming around you very quickly, and then they disappeared after totality. So the cultural experience. Well, they may take you off the beaten path, so you may go and visit a country and do all of the standard tourist sightseeing. So we went to Istanbul, saw the mosques there. We went to Cappadocia, but for the eclipse, we went for the driest part of Turkey, and this is a small town in Batman, Turkey, and not too far from Diyarbakir, and they had not really seen tourists, so the kids were just fascinated with us. And we had this, they chased our cars and they walked with us. And then we had this sort of departure party when we got on the bus to go to the site. You may do things you never thought you would do. This is dog sledding in Greenland for the Iceland annular eclipse. Again, I wanted to see Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands, so I was willing to go to an annular eclipse, which we saw low on the horizon about 2:30 in the morning, just rising. Libya, I think, was the most fascinating trip. This is their poster for the eclipse. And this was at a time that Gaddafi had kind of thawed relations with the West, and Libya was actually turning up in the 50 best places to travel. And the New York Times, and they cited especially the western part of the country where they have beautiful sand dunes, and then there's mountainous terrain in the background. And that, they say, is rare to see, the sand, desert, and mountains at the same time, and especially exceptionally beautiful. We did not go to what I call the tourist desert because we thought with sand dunes, there was more of a risk of blowing sand during totality. So we were on the eastern half of the country. They had set up this enormous tent city with 2,000, hosting 2,000 people from all different countries. It was like the largest sand parking lot you've ever seen. So we were due south of Benghazi, about the central part of the country. This is where they do a lot of their oil extraction, and not much else out there. So this is what it looked like out there. We actually had a flat tire going back, and the only way to do a bathroom run was to have someone hold up a blanket. A couple people hold up a blanket during the flat tire and do it. There was absolutely nothing to hide behind. But what the best thing about this terrain was the shadow bands were spectacular. It filled the entire desert. This is our tents, and we were not expecting. We thought we would just get little pup tents, but it was actually Libyan version of glamping. We had jute rugs and decorative fabrics and real mattresses, and we also had flush toilets and showers, far more than we were expecting. We had a life flight helicopter in case somebody got sick. And I didn't know until the last day. I told my parents I'm going to be out of communication, that they actually had a communication tent, which on the last day we discovered the guy who was signing the first cover for the stamps. And these are the best stamps I've seen for Eclipse, was in that tent. So Gaddafi actually showed us a really good time. I think he wanted to impress us. They also have terrific Roman ruins. This is the second largest Roman ruin city, Sabratha, which I think is the most beautiful. This is, I think, near the amphitheater. And they also, as you can see in the background, they have a cobalt blue Mediterranean Sea. The only problem is they have some trash on the beach. One thing I liked about Libya that I thought, boy, other people should learn from this. Our tour guide told us that for middle school, they have only single-sex education. Boys and girls are separated, and they have co-ed education for elementary and for high school. And here's some middle school girls also visiting Sabratha. And as you can see, people and women are dressed colorfully. It was not an especially ultra-conservative Muslim country over there. And this is the largest Roman city, Leptis Magna. So the point is that if they can get their politics together, they could have a wonderful, they really have a lot to show to tourists. And we were told many times, tell your fellow Americans we are not our government when we were over there. Now, there's something comical about tyrants sometimes. We saw a lot of these kind of over-the-top posters of Gaddafi. He was wearing colorful glasses sometimes. And I kept asking people for their 1 dinar notes because I loved his Jack Benny pose. Now this is the 1 dinar note after he was killed. So we have the revolutionaries on it. I understand Libya has calmed down some. I need to read a little bit more about it, but they have a lot of potential. Hillary Clinton was right. I would have thought the same thing, that they did elect a moderate government and then it got overrun by extremists that they were not prepared to hold off at the time. It does help to learn a little Travelese, and this paid off probably especially well in Libya, but I do have a story from Turkey. We were there during the Perseids meteor shower, and so we went out like at 4 a.m. We're all lying down on the ground, and these 2 guys with rifles came up with these big white flashlights, and Paul Maley was seeing them face on, and he was waving his hands saying, turn off the flashlights, as if they understand that. But I have been reading my dialogues, and I found Turkish was the absolute hardest language. I tried to learn some Travelese. Every word was like 5 or 6 syllables with no mnemonics to help you remember. But there was one phrase that kept sticking in my mind, and it was "Bir dakika lütfen," which is 1 moment, please. And I was so upset that stuck in my mind, because that was in the restaurant dialogue, and you don't say that. The waiter says it after you order something. Well, I said good evening in Turkish, and I said bir dakika lütfen. They just looked at me, and I ran and got the tour guide in the bus, and he came and talked to them and found out they were beekeepers, wondering what we were doing there. But bir dakika lütfen turned out to be really handy. In Libya, they were so appreciative. I just learned how to say hello, how are you? I understand now that kaifa lahal, and it's almost like the Klingon language. They have a soft H and then they have a hard H, which is in English for English speakers. So this is kaifa lahal, which is in the back of your throat. And that's for a man. It's kaifa halka for a woman, which it took me a little while to figure that out because they didn't bother to show me that at the beginning of the book. So the women looked at me funny, but the men were like, come on up, let's take some pictures. They were so happy to hear me say something to them in Arabic. This is modern Arabic. They know I'm not a dialect speaker, but it is a way to get around and be understood. It's what they read in magazines, not necessarily what they speak. But that kind of thing is pretty standard. This is in Benghazi. So a couple of our members noticed that there was a fish market near our hotel, and we ditched the city tour and the bus that was supposed to happen and walked over to the fish market and the boat building. And then this is just a really beautiful young boy and also his sister. I asked his mother if I could take a photograph, and she allowed me to take the photograph. So for me, places like Tripoli and Benghazi are no longer abstract, just something, a name I read in the newspaper. I have much more concrete feeling of people there. This is the oldest daughter. She had 5 daughters at our tour guide's home. We told them we wanted to go to an authentic Libyan restaurant, and we've been hearing about his daughters. We'll take your whole family, but he brought us to his home, and his sister had cooked a 7-course meal. There were only 17 of us, but he had a beautiful home inside. It looked nondescript on the outside, and he was very educated, been to the United States, very liberal thinker, moderate thinker, and his sister, the daughters here were in university. This was in 2009 in Wuhan, headed to Wuhan. We were on our way to Lhasa, Tibet. We were going to go in 2008, but then they had the monk uprising and it wasn't safe, so they rescheduled it for 2009. These are Tibetan students who are going all the way from Beijing on the train back to Lhasa, or actually to a smaller town. They got off before Lhasa. Okay, in Wuhan, I didn't realize the significance of this until my last talk. I've never actually put this on, it's on YouTube. I've never shown it to a group until the Houston Astronomical Society recently. And I realized, oh my gosh, the one time I saw a bat was in downtown Wuhan. So I'm just going to start this briefly where some of us stayed at the hotel and some of us went up to the airport, and I was with the group that stayed at the hotel. So everybody's very, very polite over there. And we had the going in and out clouds. It actually was clear for all the partial phases, and those macro clouds went over it. But what I learned in Wuhan was that almost all of China was overcast, but there was a lake in central Wuhan, and I could watch the satellite, and the clouds were parting around the lake. The lake is usually cooler. So I realized we had 2 set places to look, but we should have gone to, it was fairly high up in the sky. We should have gone to the opposite shore of the lake. So we had the most water to look over. We probably would have been in the clear spot. That was 2/3 of the sky for us. So I'm going to go to over here, and I'm going to stop it for a minute. What I did, we had a little bit of overcast. So I swung the camera over to the horizon. I thought there'd be pretty sunset colors, but there were not. Let me go over there. So you see the rusty colored buildings. Look on the right side, and from the rightmost building, you're going to see something that looks like a fluttery piece of paper. And someone else told me, no, that's definitely a flight of a bat. I didn't have, there it is. Okay, so look on the right. It's going to come from the middle of the building. There it is. I'll do that. So I was told, no, that's a characteristic figure 8 flight path of a bat, and it has a floppy look. Now I've seen bats over my house, floppy looking flight path, and also it makes a figure 8 when it catches an insect. So there you go. Wuhan definitely has bats, and not necessarily in a lab. So the transit of Venus, I'm going to mention this because of interesting travel, but also the instrument we use for watching the transit of Venus is also great for partial phases. And this is where I learned that you can go to a troubled part of the world and it's not, but that people are people. So this is in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. And my cousin who works with sex trafficking says it's a very sad place to go, Uzbekistan. It's often in the news for oppression, but then you see this. In the background, that's Jimmy. And you'll see toward the end that women don't want them facing up. It's going to come with the camera and then grab. So I found the older ladies there delightful. I thought Uzbekistan has the best art direction of any country I've been to. This is folk dancers. This is the colorful fabrics. The women smile with their mouths closed because they have free health care, but they don't have free dental care. They have a lot of gold in their mouths or missing pieces. And then this is, they have the Ulugh Observatory by the 15th century ruler who was also quite a great astronomer. And he built a transit telescope. He determined he cataloged over 1,000 stars. He determined the length of the sidereal year to within 25 seconds, bettering Copernicus. And he created trigonometry tables to sines and tangents accurate to 8 places. Then we've observed the transit of Venus at the Darvaza gas crater, which is a place that the Russians set fire to, thinking they'd just burn off a little natural gas. And it's still burning. It's like 60 years later. This is what it looks like in the evening. We camped there. But this is what we observed with, other than our own instruments. This is the sun spotter. Great if you have a group of students, and it also would be very good for partial phases of an eclipse. Gives a really nice, clear, large image. Costs about $400 and is not too bulky to carry, but you can carry it. And it's really nice if you're trying to show a group of kids a really good focused image of the sun. This is Ashgabat, Turkmenistan, which reminded me of the city in the Hunger Games. This is the largest indoor Ferris wheel that was about to open. And notice there's nobody out there because they were having a summer like we're starting to have now. It's like 104 and brutally hot. So every monument had one person kind of covered from head to toe and a broom. And beautiful traditional dress there. So then Australia in 2012, I'm going to show you this for an actual cloud situation that I avoided. So we were staying in Cairns over here in a hotel, and the sun was going to be fairly low, and our sight line was going to be over this low hills over this way. And we saw quite a bit of buildup of clouds, but it looked like there was a buildup of clouds all the way up the coast. But I kept thinking, we're not even going to have a chance over here. We've got warm air coming in from the water, and it's probably going to keep going, even though it's not very tall, but probably going to keep going up and forming clouds. So at first, I couldn't get anybody to travel. Some people had gone at 2:30 in the morning way west to get above all this stuff. Nobody seemed to want to leave the hotel. But we had the astronaut Claude Nicollier, who had done 2 of the Space Telescope repair missions. And I said, can't we take a bus and go north? And he said, well, nobody wants to seem to do that. And I said, well, I think we have a 100% chance of missing it if we stay here, and maybe a 95% chance of missing it if we go north. But I think we have a chance if we look over water. And he said, well, we don't seem to have many people want to go. And I finally said, well, what would you do? And he said, well, I would go north. And I said, well, then let's go. We actually ended up having about 15 of us who went. So if you see, there are quite a bit of clouds to the left and to the right. But notice what happened. We were able to go at 70 miles an hour. That's the other thing I learned, is if you travel and run during the partial phases, nobody's on the road. So we weren't in bumper to bumper traffic. We just sped for 30 minutes up the coast. And as soon as we saw the sun emerge, we pulled over and we ended up at Clifton Beach. And we had a beautiful view of the sun. This is actually a really pretty eclipse. And often if you have some clouds, it's actually a really pretty view. You just don't want them to cover the sun. But all those clouds you see on the right hand of the picture, where the land's starting to kind of well up, it was cloudy all the way down, very opaque. So the people in the, this is us, Claude Nicollier was very happy with me for pushing on going up north. And this is, it looks like it was pretty clear, but they told us at the hotel, they did not see the eclipse at all. So all they got was a picture of the streetlights coming on. Uganda was one we went to. This is a short eclipse. The longest it was going to be on land was 23 seconds. Other people were out in the ocean for up to 1.5 minutes. But I wanted to see Uganda. So I wanted to do the animal part and the gorillas. This is the only time we did some independent travel, but arranged by Africa Safari Adventures, I think it's called, in Colorado. And there was just 6 of us. I'm behind the camera, and that's our tour guide. And I'd also found out at that trip that you have to go all the way across the world. Air Emirates is the way to do it, because for many cities in the United States, it looks like it's a 32-hour flight, but the reason is that you have about an 8 or 9 hour layover where you can actually get into an inexpensive hotel room at the airport and lie down for your only layover. That has been infinitely easier than the 3 stops of the 4-hour layovers each, like we did in my first trip. So we had the mountain gorillas. This is Bwendi, where the mountain gorillas are. We visited the school. This is the Batwa, the pygmy people who live over there. And then for the eclipse, we found a family in the path, and we gave them all eclipse glasses. And I felt really bad because 10 minutes before totality, a single cloud that the sun had been next to started to move over the sun. So we got in the car, someone had an app, and we were at the 23-second point, but someone noticed on our road that was going mostly along the path, but still going out, because it was such a short eclipse. It was only 5 miles wide. And so at the 10-second point, we were able to hop out. This is a quick handheld digital SLR. And again, very quick eclipse, but also one of the prettiest inner coronas I've seen, because the moon's small and you see the prominences all the way around. This is in Ternate, Indonesia. This is one of my favorite cultural photos. It's on the roof of our hotel. This is the annular eclipse in southern India, again, because I wanted to go see India. And we stopped at a mosque. We were staying in Coimbatore, but we knew that was in the mountains. It would be cloudy, so we got into the bus to go someplace more clear, and succeeded. I love the dress of the women. That's at a tourist attraction, but it was interesting that only men came up to the mosque to look at the eclipse. There were no women, and we gave them those eclipse glasses. And then finally, April in 2023 in Western Australia, the reason I'm going to show you this one, it's again a very short eclipse. I wanted to see this alien terrain I had noticed on PBS. And this is the eclipse guru, Kate Russo, who's actually helping a lot of cities in the United States. I think she's working with Rochester. Last I heard, she was planning on observing it in Uvalde, Texas. And she's the eclipse person in Australia. She helps cities prepare. There's going to be one in Sydney in 2028. And she came with us. So I was with a private group. We had a private island. And the reason I want to show you this is, first, Kate Russo, this is a fun thing to do, to punch some holes that make a pretty picture or spell out the date and make some crescent pictures. This is the best on the right. I think that's the closest to the naked eye corona view I've seen. But this is a pale representation of these 3 prominences here. It looked like extremely bright red laser pointers pointed straight at us on this left side. This is just my quick point and shoot of the scene. But we had a National Geographic photographer with us. And this is, I think, a sped up maybe 2 or 4 times, because totality was 56 seconds. They took a wonderful drone video. And the shadow was coming from the left side of the picture, roughly. So again, these were probably the most brilliant prominences I saw. They were not brilliant all the way around, but the ones on the left side were the most brightest and biggest and juiciest I've ever when you're going through Dubai, this time I only had a 4-hour layover. On the way back, I discovered the sleeping pods, even though I did not necessarily sleep. I do a lot of movies on Emirates. Emirates is pretty comfortable in coach. I actually did manage to do some sleep. It was incredibly relaxing to get a sleeping pod at the airport. Those are starting to turn up more. So you could put your carry-on under the seat. You could turn a recliner into a bed, and you had a dimmable light. You had a place to charge your phone. And it was just incredibly comfortable and a way to decompress between flights. It's very quiet also. So if you don't travel all over the place, you have to wait for the eclipse to come to you, and you guys have done that. So in Memphis, here's Javier Ube's map. You're over here, and you are only about an hour outside the path. And this shows, I'm going to show you later with an actual open map, but notice the shape of the moon shadow. You don't have to go very far in to start getting a longer eclipse because of the shape of the shadow. If you're very close to the edge, you get a very short eclipse, but really you just have to go a little bit in to already be at 2 minutes, and even just a little bit farther to already be at 3 minutes. So what I recommend, and right now it looks like you guys actually do have good lodging, especially on Airbnb, to stay close to the center line. But if you can't find that, or their prices are too high, you can always try a little bit farther out, and then you can drive to the center line. You do need to plan for a large city like Memphis to have practically the whole city trying to get in there. So even if you're only an hour out, you may have a 6-hour trip just to get into the path if you're trying to go that day. So if you have the luxury, this is on a Monday afternoon, close almost 2 o'clock for totality. I recommend that if you have to work and you can't do it any other way, then go ahead and drive in and out. But if you have the luxury to do it, just get an inexpensive Airbnb and be stationed within the eclipse, so that if nothing else, you have a comfortable place. You need to expect bathrooms to be scarce. You need to carry lots of water, toilet paper, whatever you need, because you may have a lot of people on the road. And you have a nice little network of lots of little roads to, if you have to chase clouds, to stay close to the center line. These are the clouds across the eclipse path. This is also for eclipse time. This is Jay Anderson, the weather guru's calculations based on NASA satellite data. And this is statistical. So other than Texas, and Mexico's the very best, but other than Texas, you guys are about the next best. So Little Rocket dips down here. And what we're seeing over here is degree of cloud cover expected. So you guys are better than the whole rest of the path going north. I do see, let me see if we have, I can't remember how close my cousin in Boston is, but I don't think he's right in the path that goes through Maine and Vermont. And then the cloud cover, I like weatherspark.com. You can plug in a specific city, and you can also do that on the home page. And you get all sorts of statistics, including cloud statistics. And you can choose the whole year or just the whole month. But for something like this, it doesn't matter specifically that it's the 8th. But if you just choose a day in April, you will get an hour-by-hour average cloud cover. So for you, at about 2 p.m., you actually are in the least cloudy part of the day. And I consider anything from clear, the dark blue, to mostly clear to partly cloudy doable. Mostly cloudy is sometimes doable if you happen to be in a hole. Sometimes water can create a hole. And overcast, then try to run. But do know that sometimes at the last minute, there's this 16 to 20 degree temperature drop. Clouds can change on you. So you need to be ready to hop in the car and go. I've done that 3 times. The other times I've been able to stay where I was, and I didn't have to go terribly far just to get out from under a cloud on a partly cloudy day. This is shows both the annular eclipse, which is on October 14th. It's not very close to you guys in Memphis, but it is in some great vacation spots. The El Dorado star party is going to be in Sonora, Texas, and they have timed that for the eclipse. And then, of course, you're really well placed for the 2024. But 97%, 99% is not good enough. I could not get my sister-in-law to come to Idaho because my brother and sister-in-law swore that she had seen one when she was a kid, but was kind of blasé, didn't see what the big deal was. And I kept saying that she didn't see a total. Yes, she did. No, she didn't. Finally, unfortunately, it was too late. One day before, I said, because they were in Washington State, I said, where was she in 1979? It was Wenatchee, Washington, 25 miles outside the path. So it almost got down to diamond ring, but nothing more. And then this is Fred Espenak's site. This is very useful if you're driving into the path. I just bought the 2023 version. He has one for 2023 also, and they're on his website, mreclipse.com. He has an atlas with the path overlaid. So this is really terrific if you're just going to wait that day, or if you have to chase clouds, to know how the roads overlay with the path. And it's worth getting. It's $20 for, yeah, he has a color version, a black and white version, and a digital edition. And planned yesterday, I mean, it's almost too late for Central Texas. The price gouging is even worse than the Grand Tetons, but it's not so bad where you guys are. I did see an Airbnb west of Pocahontas, I think it was, for running about 125 or 130 a night per person if you filled it up. It housed 8 people. That's not too bad. And what's coming up next is Spain in August 2026. Unfortunately, it's August and it may be very hot. A 6-minute eclipse goes through Luxor, Egypt, and across the Red Sea in 2027. That's the biggest one in the near future. And then the Australia Outback and Sydney are on the center line in 2028. This is ultimate eclipse imaging. This is actually more detailed than what your eye sees, although it's missing the prominences. But this is heavily processed corona. This is actually more than your eye sees. And then finally, this is my dream eclipse of Saturn eclipsing the sun. And I'll leave this up for just a couple minutes. You can take a screenshot of this screen. And the all-purpose site is at the top, eclipse2024.org, because it has links to many of these other sites that you need, except for vrbo.com and Airbnb. So if you find hotels are price gouging or they're full, try VRBO, vacation rental by owner, or Airbnb. I know from experience, be sure you tell them about the eclipse if they don't specifically mention it. Make sure they know, make sure their families are taken care of. Make sure they're not going to pull it out from under you and say, oh my gosh, I didn't know there was an eclipse. Make sure it's a super host for Airbnb or a premium host for vrbo.com. They have reputations to uphold. They will be fair, and send them some information to create some goodwill. So I did that in Idaho. And by the time the eclipse came, people were charging 4 times as much for the we had a 7-bedroom, 5.5 bath mansion. We booked 2 years in advance, but he allowed it. He said he was happy to have us because we kept in touch and sent a lot of information. If something happens at the last minute, you get dropped, new ones come up. People start hearing about the eclipse. Even backyards start coming for rent for people to set up tents. So do not despair. There'll be some place to watch it. And I'm going to go ahead and stop my share. If anyone wants to see it, I do have a map of, it's pretty late, right? Yeah, this is a long talk. So if you need to see it, I have a Javier UBA's map up, and you can kind of see how you can blow it up and click on it. The timings on them, I'll just tell you, the timings on the map are in universal time, Greenwich, England. So you need to adjust for your time zone. If you're in central time zone, it will be central daylight time. So you need to subtract 5 hours from all of the timings that it shows. And on eclipse2024.org, where they have the link to it, they also have a tutorial on how to use it. That's wonderful. You can go on a specific backyard or house and see exactly what time the eclipse is. And that's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Debbie. We got some questions coming in. Yeah, let's go ahead and give her applause. It was an excellent talk, very detailed, a lot of information to process. So, and a lot of adventures around the globe.
Yeah, the adventures are worthwhile, and every eclipse is different. But I did learn something from multiple eclipses.
Excellent. Yeah, it's fun to see those adventures and those experiences. So for the one we've got coming up in 24, if you're near the center line, you've got basically 4 minutes of duration during totality. So that should be plenty of time to sketch the corona if you'd like to. How long did it take you to sketch that one?
That was yeah, I used a lot of the time. I start out with a rough outline, and then with whatever time I had left, I start doing more details, like more brushiness. In cans, I had more time. It was a short flower petal looking corona with short petals. I didn't have time to do like all the details within each flower petal, but I was able to do the rough outlines in 2 minutes, in 4.5 minutes. And you guys have 4 minutes and 14 seconds at the center line. The reason I like doing that is I've never seen a corona so well as the ones I sketched. You get distracted when you're taking pictures of them, and your sketch gets more closer to what you see than any photo.
Yeah, there's no substitute for the human eye for what you see.
Right.
One of the things I noticed too, you're talking about time during duration. You know, one of the real value of the Eclipse ambassadors like yourself and Dr. Angela Speck and some of the others who are going around spreading the word is you can really help people prepare for how to spend those 2 to 4 minutes during totality. And when I look back at the last eclipse in 2017, you know, I'm really satisfied. It was only 2 minutes and 32 seconds, but I'm really satisfied with how well that time was spent because of people like you who helped me prepare for, you know, looking at the corona naked eye, seeing it, looking at the 360-degree sunset, noticing where the planets are, and some of the other effects. So that's one of the real values of these kinds of talks.
Yeah, you don't have a lot of time, and you're excited, and so for the shorter eclipses, I do not recommend taking pictures. I tried that the first few, and you really need a very fine equipment to get anything that's really impressive. There'll always be people who do that, and it's distracting. So I think our photographer, it was his first eclipse, but he admitted he took some great pictures, but he admitted he barely saw it.
Yeah.
So that was only 57 seconds. So everybody there, I said, do not take pictures. Just look.
Just look at it, right?
Yeah.
57 seconds is not long.
No.
We have several comments and questions coming in from the chat here. Shadow bands. Do you know if those are an interference effect or are those an atmospheric phenomenon?
I'm thinking that they are atmospheric. I don't know. It might be a little bit of both. I'm not absolutely sure. You might look it up on Wikipedia. I assumed they were interference as it gets very narrow, but I've heard someone else say it was atmospheric, that it's currents within the atmosphere being projected onto the ground. But it does happen when there's just a narrow slit of light. So I'm not sure. I assumed interference for many, many years.
Be interesting if it was
And-
quantum.
Yeah, and it's a sometimes you see it, so it's worth looking for each time. Some people say wait till afterwards. Again, there's like 3 different things. You have to look at the ground for shadow bands, and sometimes behind or in front of you for the shadow coming at you, and then up to see Bailey's beads. You can't do it all at once, but
It's a
you
lot
can
to
split
try.
it up for the beginning of the eclipse and the end of the eclipse, or use a camera like that shadow coming over. That's the best I've ever seen because most people are already turned toward the sun by then.
I'm wondering for shadow bands, if you can just put a flat white sheet down, point a camera at it and just.
Right. Yeah, you could do that, but it is fun to see. And the camera, it's rare. That was an unusually good video. The camera has a hard time catching it because sometimes they're subtle. Your eye definitely sees them. So we saw them. We had light colored kind of ground and dry grass in Zambia. We saw them there. I have in China, we did have, maybe it's because of the clouds, but we did have, we had a big white sheet down there and nothing happened. So sometimes it seems to be a sometimes thing. So maybe it is more atmospheric than you would think you would get an interference pattern every time. But I'm now starting to pick, I actually wanted to go to Rexburg, Idaho, because they had this gigantic white, snow white Mormon temple. I sometimes try to find some place that has something white to look at. Even a white car will do it. And that way you don't have to, but if you don't have that, take a white hotel towel with you.
Right. Just a
And
white surface.
yeah, that's your only chance. It's got to be a light colored surface.
I'm going to open it up, by the way, while I go through the chat. So if anybody has any questions for Debbie or any comments, feel free to unmute yourself. Great talk. Go ahead.
I've got one if possible. Debbie, for those of us in Houston, in my case, I actually have relatives in the southwestern Fort Worth. Do you see any problem with just being there and driving an hour to the center line, leaving 2 or 3 hours in advance?
Yeah, that's fine because I think a lot of Dallas sites will not bother. They have 3 to 3.5 minutes. Fort Worth is just a little bit less, but you still have 3 minutes in most parts of Fort Worth. So I recommend having that's plenty of time to have a good experience. So I recommend
And I'm actually
positioning maybe a little away from the center line, because it's just little tiny towns at the center line without a lot of infrastructure. And yeah, try to pick some little less traveled road, like not where all of Dallas is going. But I think because Dallas is so well placed, you're not going to have the problem we have in Houston of the entire city trying to. We got 4 million people here at 94%. And so I really felt it was urgent to get into the path. Well,
and you think people will be actually getting on the roads to the point of really clogging the roads for that?
Oh yeah, even in Chile they did that. So and in Madras, Oregon got like the reputation for the best weather. It actually had more dust and wildfire smoke there than we had in Idaho. But they had, I think, 3-hour drives were 13 hours. But on the other hand, there were not a lot of roads to choose from. So I think we have more roads to choose from near Memphis and Houston. There's a bunch of different directions. If you have good weather, there's a lot of different directions. If everybody is like all trying to get to the same spot, it could be more difficult. But be sure you're comfortable. Take everything you need. Like if you can't find comfort at a stop, have lots of water and food and be prepared. It's like some of them are like fleeing Hurricane Rita. I remember we had those horrible traffic jams. They had that in Chile also. My violin student, I kept trying to tell him, do not go right after the eclipse. And he did. And he said it was a nightmare back to Santiago.
Yes, Debbie, hi, this is Ron. Thank you for your presentation. Quick question. I want to know, have you had a chance to do any readings or research about how people in earlier pre-scientific times reacted to solar eclipses?
Well, yeah, I mean, they were obviously terrified. So we know that the Chinese were like trying to shoot the dragon eating the sun. So I can't even imagine having no idea that this thing's about to happen and having it happen. I haven't gone really detailed into archaeoastronomy, but in general, these were people dealing with something that they didn't know if the sun was going to come back, and they didn't have all the calculations and the advance notice in most cases. So it was, for them, it's very frightening. We're lucky we can just enjoy it. We know the sun's going to come back. But I'm kind of surprised how many people in modern times say that they're struck by how wrong it seems. And to me, it's like, okay, the moon's in front of the sun, but they're like, oh my gosh, it looks like a hole in the sky. And this is just all wrong to see night during day. And it's just the way, if you haven't seen it before, people are often surprised by it. And I think they're surprised because the pictures are not really completely accurate. It's also not static. Things are changing around you while it's happening. The inner corona is changing as the sun, especially this one, 4.5 minutes. You might see some prominences on one side, then some new ones will come out on the other side as it proceeds. So it's wonderful because it's, and also the shadow swings across the sky at mid-eclipse. It's more like a giant black, dark U around the sun, and then it kind of swings around. There's a lot of things happening in a short time. And also I have not, I mean, the diamond ring naked eye is far better than any, it's absolutely stunning. It's like a jewel up there. So it's far better than any picture I've seen. That does not do it justice. It's just a jewel-like glow to it. That's absolutely beautiful. I remember in Chile, they were exceptionally beautiful, both going in and coming out. So always you can catch it coming out, and it's unmistakable. I mean, it suddenly brightens. You're not going to say, gee, am I going to forget to put my glasses back on? There's a huge difference between no beads of light and even one bead of light. You'll know for sure. But you can use maps now. You can use apps. I forgot the name of the app. I should have boned up on that has been mentioned to me. But there's like a solar eclipse app that uses GPS and can tell you exact timings for wherever you're standing, and even do countdowns on your phone.
Yeah, that's an essential app. I know there was one for 17. I don't know if they've updated it for 24, but definitely get that app on your phone, because it will, you're right, wherever you are, it will tell you, I think to the second, when first contact is, when, totality begins and ends, and you can plan you're observing around those times. So.
And if you don't do that, you know where you're going to be. But I did in Australia, because we're going to be off of this island, might not have internet access. I did a screenshot of about where I thought we were going to stand. And I actually did it a couple different places on the island. I wasn't sure where we'd be on the shore, but it's only like a mile long or half a mile long. So I did screenshots of Javier's timings, and that worked really well. And I was counting down seconds, and I was actually pretty right on. And I just had that, I just referred to it on my phone.
Nice. Just reading the chat here. Anybody else has any questions, again, chime in.
Just a comment. The app is called Totality, and I've still got it on the phone. I used it for the 2017 eclipse, and it was just spot on. It gave a countdown, and it was exactly right. I'm assuming they're going to update it for the 2024 eclipse as well. But yeah, it's well worth it. I don't remember whether I paid for it or whether it was free, but even if I paid for it, it wasn't much money, even if I did pay for it. So yeah, well worth it.
Yeah, we heard about another app in Fred Espenak's talk at the Astronomical League convention, and he mentioned it's like a $2 or $3 app. And I don't think I had Totality in the name. I think it was Solar Eclipse, but obviously there's more than one app that does that. So I think you just do a search and for Android or for Apple. And that really is nice to know, especially if you have children with you, to have a good idea of when it's safe to look up from just by timings. And also, boy, it really came in handy if you're getting close to the edge of the path to know that, oh my gosh, we're losing totality here. But you have a nice big one. Hopefully that won't be a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, comment. I was in Hawaii for the 1991 eclipse and got clouded out. We were on the Kona coast, and I saw that you showed a picture that someone took from Mauna Loa, and we were near the foot of Mauna Kea, and it was cloudy that day, probably the only time that whole year that it got cloudy on that side of the island. But the clouds lifted just as the shadow was, the edge of the shadow, the trailing edge of the shadow was approaching the shore, and I could see it. I happened to look in that direction. I could see the edge of the shadow moving towards us over the ocean, and then zoomed over us and went up the mountains to the east. And it was an amazing sight. It was just incredible how fast the moon moves. You look at the moon in the sky, and intellectually, it moves. And if you watch it for, even a few minutes against the background of the stars, you can see that it does move. But to see that shadow move, it just astonishingly fast as it covers the ground.
Yeah, that's something I actually had never. I think Idaho was my first time to try that. It's like I tried in China in 2008. I couldn't see a hard edge, but I turned to the side. It's the only time I've seen, and I have it on YouTube, it's the only time I've seen a vertical edge of the shadow. So I caught that. I could just see this vertical edge moving across the sky this way. And I followed that with my camera. And then by the time I turned it, came all the way around. I could see behind me that the ground suddenly became dark. So I was experiencing this just darkening, but that was probably the best thing that showed the speed. If I had continued to face the shadow instead of follow it, I would have had that experience, I think. I've always heard that if you're that was a nice flat area, if you can get that impression of speed.
Excellent information. I'm headed to Albuquerque in October for the Annular and Sky and Telescope tour based in Austin, Texas. We're total heading to Fredericksburg for viewing. So, Annular eclipse. Can you tell us about your plans?
I may end up in Sonora, Texas at the El Dorado Star Party, because I was asked to give a light pollution talk over there. If I don't, I'll probably just drive in closer to San Antonio or something. But I am thinking about the El Dorado Star Party. I've never been there. The Sonora Caverns are stunning right there. So if you do go, I saw them when I was 10. I was like, why is this the prettiest caverns I've ever seen? Nothing else seems to equal them. And then I saw a brochure that said speedometers think this is one of the most beautiful caverns in the world. So I was like, and I went back, it's 50 years later. I'm like, yep, it was not just it was my first caverns. They really are exceptionally beautiful. Wow. So that's a nice other feature. There's not a lot else out there, but I highly recommend the caverns if you go out there.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you were going to El Dorado. So you're thinking about it.
Yeah, if I speak out there, maybe even if I don't, I just haven't. I've been dragging my feet planning.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Corpus Christi does not have especially good weather, but San Antonio, that's not too bad a drive. And an Annular is not necessarily the whole city going to drive over there. It's more usually hardcore astronomers do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you about Albuquerque. I was going to shoot for that. I booked 2 Airbnbs back in February. Both were shot down. So obviously they get wind of the balloon festival well in advance. So have you ever been to the balloon festival out there?
I haven't. I had a friend, I asked her if she wanted to go there. One of my favorite Eclipse roommates, she said, well, I've done the Balloon Festival. She had done all of all of the touristy things over there. I was invited, but my friend Emma, the one you saw for the Philippines in my talk, she has an Airbnb. And but she didn't actually invite me to stay with her. She has a tiny one with like just a couple places to sleep, and she's traveling with a friend. She thought I might go with a friend. Now I hear the Balloon Festival is sold out. So I'm actually leaning towards Sonora. That's about 6-hour drive from Houston, and it's a really nice place.
Yeah, I talked to Merrill, he's one of our colleagues. He went to the Balloon Festival, I think last year. He said if you wanted to go, you had to get up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon to start driving. The traffic is pretty challenging. So
yeah, I think Utah and Albuquerque are kind of the it places. I think Albuquerque is going to be very crowded. Midland, my hometown, I haven't been back there since I was about 18. That's a possibility too. I found out my little tiny house I grew up in is still there. I figured by now it would have become a McMansion, but still the little tiny house over there.
it's always an option. I didn't know El Dorado was coinciding with the Annular. So
yeah, so it's on a Saturday, and they're ending it on that. They're going through that Saturday.
excellent.
They timed it for it, so it's usually in October.
Yeah, it's a good time. It's a Saturday too.
Right.
Hey, Jeremy, I had a question.
Yes.
Earlier in your speech, your presentation, you said something about the October eclipse, and it sounded like you said it was going to come from Corpus Christi up to Odessa to Albuquerque to Oregon. The actual path is the opposite way, isn't it?
It's reversed. Yeah, I didn't even look into that. I realized when I said that, that's probably not the way it's traveling. They often come from the west. So what I'm thinking, I'm just doing it from my point of view, like from closest to me to farthest, but that's not necessarily the path. So it's going over one of my favorite, what's the name of that? I've been to southern Utah, and there's a wonderful national park there. The people I travel with are going to be in Mexican Hat, Utah for the eclipse itself, and they're doing the Grand Canyon and all these other wonderful Southwest locations. So I've just been dragging my feet. I just haven't planned it yet.
If you've never been to southern Utah, it is breathtakingly spectacular. There's a stretch of road from Blanding, Utah to Torrey. It's 200 miles through the Glen Canyon. And it's just spectacular scenery, mile after mile. Torrey, Utah is where Capitol Reef National Park is.
Yeah,
right in the center of Annularity.
Yeah, Capitol Reef. That was one, and that has these dark burgundy. I remember, my gosh, it has like purple burgundy rocks I didn't see on the other parts of the drive. So I was struck by how varied Utah is, and I think they're planning another Bryce Canyon Astronomical League convention would be another opportunity to see that whole area. So there's lots of drives close by, but I agree. I've only been to southern Utah once, and it's fabulous. So that's definitely a reason to get to an annular eclipse.
Yeah. So an annular is not as spectacular as a total, but given the timing and the location, the October eclipse has got some wonderful sights and photo ops, but it's a morning eclipse, so it's going to be fairly low on the horizon.
Now that's one is also worth taking a small telescope. So I'd actually rather lean towards someplace that's in drivable range and take my 5-inch with the filter. That's a nice way to watch an annular, especially if we're kind of having an active sun right now.
Yeah.
And you can see the bumpiness on the edge of the moon when you have a telescope.
The jagged edge on the end of the edge of the moon. Right. Binoculars for viewing. So the Lunt Sunoculars, They're available on greatamericaneclipse.com. You can get them for like $129. Any other resources you recommend for those?
I like, I don't remember if, probably just Amazon. Look for solar binoculars, which are good for partial phases. You need unfiltered binoculars you can look at with binoculars during totality. I do recommend kind of limiting yourself to how long you look, because you don't want to see the diamond ring at the end with binoculars. So if you're doing this varied view, put the binoculars kind of in the first half or first 2/3 of totality, and don't be looking toward the end of totality. So yeah, you would need, if you do that, then you need both solar ones and then just ordinary binoculars during totality.
Right. That's another thing I got right last time. Had the ordinary binoculars during totality, and you could see not only the corona, but Regulus right there next to the sun.
Yeah,
So,
that's actually
again,
a great view. They
yeah.
fit really well, and just I have 7x42s I take with me.
Oh, okay. So you can get the whole sun with the corona in there.
Yeah, that's enough to generally see the whole corona. So you don't want too narrow a field in case it's a big splashy corona. I don't think this one's supposed to be. It might be more compact, because the active suns with more sunspots, you have a more compact corona. And apparently less active, you have the bigger streamers, which seems counterintuitive to me, but
Yeah.
but that's the way I understand it.
I did not know that. So it's probably going to be more compact in 24.
And there's also corona predictions, which are unfortunately really accurate. It's like takes the whole surprise away, but they're very accurate what they predict the corona will look like. I'm glad I didn't know for my first eclipse.
Yeah.
It was just to be shocked by it. It was amazing.
Right. Spontaneity and just dealing with what comes, right?
Right.
Okay. Atmospheric. So shadow bands, it looks like, yeah. What do we think?
Is it atmospheric? Mm-hmm.
Like twinkling stars.
That would make sense why it doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't remember if angle makes a difference. I don't think it has, because I've seen them with a low sun and a high sun.
Yeah. So bottom line is, if we want to see shadow bands, we got to hope for poor seeing conditions, meaning the atmosphere is more turbulent.
Right, exactly. That doesn't seem to bother a corona, though. It's more like looking at nebulae, the corona, which are not so much affected by a cold front. You don't worry too much about the little planets you can see.
Yep. Waco. Have you heard any update about the site in Waco?
So I understand. I have a friend who's moving to Waco. Her son works at Baylor. The Texas Star Party site.
Right.
I haven't actually. He said he was going to post it. I'm afraid I didn't look. Baylor University is also doing a big event, but they've discovered that you don't want to do it at a stadium. So they have some offsite. So that's an alternative. But yeah, I haven't heard anything about whether Waco. I should have looked that up before coming, because I looked it up before and didn't see it listed.
Yeah.
But anyway, Texas Star Party supposedly has a very large site that can house almost the size of Texas Star Party of 500 people. That was announced, and with lots of cabins and lots of housing. So that would be a great alternative if you don't find something else. Waco's is pretty well placed.
Yeah, I haven't heard an update on that either. I checked their website. I would assume they posted on the TexasStarParty.org website.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Weeks.
It's been a few months. I looked like a couple of months after he announced it. I didn't see anything yet. But anyway, do take a look, because that might be an alternative.
Yeah, if they get that together, that would be interesting. Waco is.
I had people go at the last minute, 2017. One of my friend's sons just drove all the way up to Kentucky and slept in his van and had a good experience. Another woman is a folk dancer, and she found a folk dance camp in the site, in the path near St. Louis, and was able to sign on to that 1 month ahead, although she didn't think the eclipse guidance was all that good. But things like that come up where somebody has space.
Yeah.
Some kind of event has space. And backyards. I hear people are like, oh, so this backyard's open. We're going to bring our tent over there.
Just be prepared to be mobile. April, you hope for the best, but unfortunately, weather-wise, it's a very unpredictable month. And we've dealt with clouds in Arkansas, Texas. If you look at the weather on April 8th, the last 5 years, it's almost different every day.
Yes.
So,
yeah. And unfortunately, some of the overcasts, like in Texas, it went for last year was like 3 days of overcast. Where I'm going to be in Kingsland, Texas, so it could be wiped out for a while. I didn't see too many, and those satellite photos are on eclipse2024.org. Not too many cases where you couldn't get to a clear sky, but some of those days, I think last year was especially bad. You'd have to work at it, and you can also see an eclipse reasonably well through thin clouds. So that it doesn't have to be completely clear. Even a corona will show through cirrus, but obviously completely clear is better. But I don't know. I've seen 3 that were completely forecast to be totally clouded out. That was true. Like overcast. That was true with the Oklahoma City Annular. It's going to be overcast for 100 miles around Oklahoma City where I was, and Indonesia wasn't supposed to happen. And the same thing in Iceland, but that was very low. It's like the entire sky was overcast. And there was this little narrow window of clear way off in the distance, but that's where the sun was. It was just rising at 2:30 in the morning. And I actually I saw some people move up in our little peninsula on the north side of Iceland. I'm like, they're going to put their sun in one of these little, one of these little fingers of clouds. I think it's going to hit right in between. It went at annularity. And that's exactly what it did. In Panama, we had one group move, and we were like, I was like, why is he putting us in the direction of these hills and mountains? We have this big billowy cloud. But I noticed this thin spot, and that was an annular eclipse, so we could see it. I thought, boy, it's headed straight for this thin spot. And that's exactly what happened. You could see annularity through it, and the other people who moved saw nothing. So you do predict like where the sun's heading, and that can help you make a good decision sometimes.
You got to be nimble, right? Right down.
Right.
All right, we're coming up on 9 o'clock here. We don't want to take up too much more of your time. Been gracious to give us a couple of hours tonight. Anybody have any other comments or questions? You're talking to a certified umbraphile.
Yeah,
Rare opportunity here.
I've gotten to the point where Paul Maley asked me to actually lead in 2017, 2024, one of the sites, but he asked me to lead in Mazatlan. He's got someone better than me, I think. But those are the ones I wanted to take family who've never seen eclipses before. And we're still working on my brother because his only try was in Hawaii, and sister-in-law, I hope. So, yeah, I couldn't leave. I did actually run it by them, like, would you come to Mazatlan? But these are ones I want to be here with my United States friend.
Yep, absolutely. Keep in mind, guys, also, many of you have seen the one in 17. That was 6 years ago. But before that, it had been a 38-year hiatus, 1979 to 2017, before the last solar eclipse. You had to wait 38 years. After next year, April 8th, it'll be 20 years before we get another one here in the United States.
Right.
So, if you want to see a solar eclipse after April 8th, you're going to have to travel internationally.
Yeah.
Like Debbie's doing.
Yeah. Next ones are Spain, Australia. They're not close by. So, yeah, Egypt, Spain, Egypt, and Australia. So, yeah, most of them have traveled very, very far. We have tour guides like, why are you coming all the way over here for 2 minutes? And I remember the guy, our driver in Cannes said, oh, now I see. It's like a rock just hanging there in the sky. He was thrilled. And another guy in Australia said, oh, now I get it. So it's very hard to convince people who've never seen one that it's not like all the photographs they've seen, and it's not a partial eclipse. So that's why I actually don't like to show too many photographs and videos and say, this is the eclipse, because it's not.
Oh, it's not the same as being there. You got to experience it. So the bottom line is make every effort. We're in Memphis. We're not that far away. Every effort to drive and get into the path of totality on Monday, April 8, 2024, because this is the last time for a while in the United States. So,
yeah, allow some time, but at least you're only 1 hour. In Houston, we're like 3.5 hours. Those could be 12-hour traffic jams in a much larger city. So you could drive in that day. Just start really early. It's just going to be uncomfortable with that many hours on the road.
Yeah.
Or it might be. I might be wrong. You have a big network of roads. If it's clear, there might be, you guys might spread out.
Yep. Be prepared and check the weather ahead of time too. So, and of course, we'll keep giving information as we get closer. Okay, 9:01. With that, if nobody has any other comments or questions, we will go ahead and wrap up for the evening. A lot of positive comments. Thank you, Debbie. Best show in the world. Thank you very much.
Yeah, go see it with the moon and the sun. Absolutely. Just
Absolutely.
yeah, do it. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time, Debbie. And clear skies for October and for April 8, 2024.
Exactly. Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Everybody have a great night, and we will see you next month. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks.